Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the CRKT and Lucas Burnley Squid II in M390. This is definitely a more premium version of the Squid. I will link the original Squid right down below so you guys can check it out. It's much less expensive. This particular knife, I could only find it on the CRKT website. I would imagine eventually at some point it'll be available elsewhere, right? But the price on it is not bad, especially when we consider where it was manufactured and what it is made out of. I do definitely have a lot of things to say about the design, so stick with me if you want to hear my words on it. Thanks so much to CRKT for sending us in for a review. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me, and please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Let's go ahead and get a measurement of this knife. Overall length of the Squid II coming in at, if you want to go to the handle scales, we're looking at 6.75 inches. If you want to go all the way to the lanyard loop thing, which I guess you could still count for, ergonomic positioning. I mean, your fingers can still rest on it, right? That's going to be 7 inches. Blade length is coming in at just shy. It definitely is under 3 inches, so about 2.85. And then your cutting edge is also, about 2.85 inches. So there you go. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons up against the Ontario Rat Model 1 and the Ontario Rat Model 2. You can see here, this is kind of a wide, fat knife, but it is even shorter than the Rat 2 up against the Demco 80 20.5. Definitely a little shorter there. How about up against the Spyderco Para 3? Again, a little bit shorter there. And last but not least, let's put it up against the Benchmade Bug Out. How is the action on this guy? It's okay. If you use the thumb studs, it's fine. The thumb studs are, despite them having their own very specific kind of tucked away position, I found that it's easier to deploy this knife with thumb studs. It has a flipper tab. Now, I messed around with this thing trying to get the action exactly the way that I want it, and I'll explain it here in a little bit why I was doing that. You can push button it, right? I've gotten this to just be just right, just enough when I naturally, even still though, what I'm trying to do here is apply as little pressure as possible to see if I can get it to flip, and it's just barely missing. Light switching it, you can do it. No matter how I flip this knife, it doesn't feel like the full amount of energy that I'm trying to transfer from my index finger goes into the blade, and it leads for a less than satisfactory flip. But off the thumb studs, it feels pretty good. I kind of wish this knife just had thumb studs. That's what you're in for. This does run on bearings. There is a little bit of a double clutch. You can see what's happening here. I can't turn it and get it to kick down unless I shake it. And while you're shaking it, you risk locking it back out again. That detemp ball is not quite up on the face of the blade by the time the flipper tab meets your finger. So you are gonna run into that a little bit with this knife. Not deal breakers in my opinion, but your opinion might be different. Let's go ahead and do carry profile. Thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's close, but it is definitely a little bit thicker. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. You can see here, this guy is not as long as either of the knives, and in terms of the maximum height, it is actually pretty close. Yeah, it's almost the same. Maybe still just a hair shorter this way than the PM2 or Para 3, but absolutely still up there. We definitely still want the Squid on camera here. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'll get out my tools as per usual. My tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. We are looking at a T8 pivot. The screws holding in the scales are also T8. There's probably going to be one more screw underneath here at least. Most of the time they are smaller than the screws out here, right? Not necessarily something I need to get into. There's going to be more than what I consider to be minimal hardware on this guy, which is the main point of doing that check there. Well, not necessarily, but it's one of the points of doing that check there. So you're going to be removing these screws and then a couple at maximum screws underneath. And then if you want to take off the pocket clip, you're going to be dealing with, it looks like a couple of T6 screws right there, which is not that big of a deal. More screws than, I would consider to be minimal, but still it shouldn't be that difficult to take apart. This is a typical sandwich construction knife with a backspacer, so not that big of a deal. Let's go ahead and do the blade stock thickness. I think the blade is thicker than I would expect here. Yeah, we're coming in at, it says 148 thousandths, probably 145 thousandths, which is, you know, it's actually a little thicker than like the Spyderco PM2 or Para 3. It's weird for a knife like this, but it's not so it's not so thick that it renders the knife useless, right? A lot of it has to do with the grind and geometry of the blade, but it's just thicker than I would expect. And then finally, let's do the weight on this guy. So for materials, we are looking at M390. We're looking at some nice micarta, and then we are definitely looking at steel for the liners. I was really hoping those were going to be titanium, but they are steel. That's okay. Just wanted to make sure that that is known. That button is starting to wear out on that. The weight on this guy is pretty heavy for the overall size of the knife. 4.8 ounces, almost a 5-ounce knife, and that's mostly due to the fact that we have pretty robust steel liners. Had they done titanium, this would have probably come in at least half an ounce less. That'd be my guess. Still heavy, right? It's compact enough, right? Unless you're just really used to ultra lightweight knives, it probably won't bother you. It really depends on what types of pants you're wearing and what you've been used to carrying, but do within this information what you will. Let's go ahead and move into the meat and potatoes of this review. This is definitely a more premium version of the Squid, right? The execution of everything, these are made in Italy, by the way, if I didn't mention that. The execution of everything, it actually looks really nice. I absolutely love the finish on the blade. Sorry, we've got somebody stomping around upstairs. The finish on the blade is really nice. This is a nice semi-reflective tumbled finish, and it just, like, the execution of the blade looks just really good. I like it in combination with these partially shadow box steel liners that are also tumbled, right? I also like the green micarta and this kind of bronze pivot color that we've got right here. Same with the backspacer. It really looks good. I don't know if this comes in different, you know, combinations of colors, like if they have a black one or if they have like a tan one. I'm not really sure. This is the only one that I've seen. It looks good though. I really appreciate how big and wide the thumb studs are. They are just a hair longer, like, I mean, than like the width, the total thickness of the scales and the liners and the blade, right? But you can get your fingers underneath them, which I appreciate. I mean, honestly, it's pretty easy and they're pretty comfortable. You can also even do, that was a bad example, you can definitely do the reverse flick on this guy as well. I think the detent works really well with the thumb studs. The blade shape, definitely a utilitarian blade. Not the pointiest tip, but definitely a strong one, especially considering we have quite a bit of thickness on you know, the stock of the blade. We have a little flat that carries out 75% the length of the blade. We have a nice swedge here. This is the same, or almost exactly the same, Squid blade that we have seen throughout the years. The Squid is it seems to be an ever popular knife. It's always not directly at the top, but it's always up there, right? If you sort the major retailers, if you sort their inventory by most popular, it won't take you too long to find the Squid. The previous versions of it have all been budgety, kind of HCR 13 MOV, D2, I think, stuff like that. So it's nice to see that they decided to do one with a more premium blade steel, something that I think a lot of people were hoping to see. I think overall, you know, it feels a little thick down at the edge, but, you know, truthfully, I'll get a piece of paper out. All I'm demonstrating here is how sharp the factory edge is when we're cutting something like paper. It's lipping the paper over a bit. So this is not a super thin blade. It will slice, it will cut, but you're gonna run into stuff like this periodically, right? Now the blade can be resharpened, reprofiled to your liking, but that's how it is at the factory. Not the thinnest blade in the world. We do have a little bit of a sharpening choil here, which is nice. The thumb stud is absolutely in the cutting path. In fact, like if you're gonna cut straight down with this, that's about the first place that you need to be to clear the thumb stud. So it's not too far from your index finger, but it's a good at least half an inch, so keep that in mind. On this side, it just says CRKT. On this side, it says Burnley design, and then we have a code, 2496CVG. That always kind of cheapens it a bit for me when we have a big long code that nobody knows what it means except for the people who made it, right? So I don't really like seeing that. The overall execution of this knife is pretty good. Seating of the hardware looks good, right? Everything lines up nicely. The blade is not wonky or anything like that. The final cutting bevel looks good. It really does look good, save for one spot, which we're going to talk about here. The backspacer looks nice, and it's also radiused. If I didn't mention, the spine is also radiused, and it's radiused enough to knock down enough that you're not going to be able to strike flint off of it, at least not easily. There's definitely a lanyard thing, which they have absolutely... I mean, it's part of the backspacer, so how much can I complain, right? I guess we can't necessarily say they prioritized it over the clip. It's just positioned above the clip. The clip is still right at the back of the scales, which is where it would need to mount, and it is deep carry. That's all that you're going to see sticking out of the back. I don't like lanyard things of any type. I wish that it was back here, but it's here, and it's not hurting my feelings too much. The pocket clip itself is actually really good. For some reason, they decided not to recess these screws and not to allow for a left-handed mounting position, but okay. It's short, which is good because it doesn't want to dig into your hand as much. Ergonomically, this thing feels like what you would expect. It's like holding on to a slightly smushed little gourd-shaped object, right? It's a little potato knife. Is kind of, it's kind of fat. The scales are kind of contoured, and this area is a little bit weird, but all those edges, they look like little sharp teeth. It's actually pretty nicely knocked down, so it's not bad. This is okay. I can kind of get a full... Not the most secure four-finger purchase, but I can get it. And the pocket clip doesn't bother me too much. I really thought that I would not like holding onto this and gripping it really hard, but it's okay. This spoon bill, it comes down and it's not too aggressive, right, on the rise. And since it is a continuous rise, it should rise to meet most pocket seam thicknesses. So the benefit of that is pushing it in and out of your pocket with one hand without having to hold the pocket and then push it and mess around. I can't stand that. So that's nice. I actually don't mind this clip at all. There is an internal stop pin. I don't know if you can see it right there, reflecting just a little bit. It's riding through a channel carved in the blade. So that's fine. No blade play up, down, left, or right. This knife does run on bearings, but it feels a little tight. Getting it where I needed to get it. We'll talk about that here in a sec. Lock up, no blade play, up, down, left, or right. No lock stick, no pivot lash. And down to the closed position, we have, it's kind of a light, right? It's okay. There's a click, but it's kind of light. The centering is off. I worked pretty hard on getting this thing centered. I took it apart and put it back together 3 times. Usually, my paper trick works, which involves backing the pivot screw out, backing out the body screws and the scale screws. I actually did get underneath there now that I think about it. It was a while back. I can't remember what size of screw that was, but there definitely was one underneath there. Pulled everything out, take a piece of paper, fold it up, wedge the blade towards the side you want it to go and push it quite a ways up there. So you almost want the blade like all the way over here. And then what you do is you crank the pivot back down as hard as you can without causing any damage to the internals, right? Now this is something that you need to check with the manufacturer to find out if this type of thing is going to void your warranty. This is how I center a blade, but I'm not telling you that if you do this, you're not going to void a warranty, right? You need to talk with the manufacturer about that. I'm just telling you what I did because this is mine now, right? Tried to do that, and then after you crank that down, then you tighten down the body screws and the scale screws. Then you pull the piece of paper out, and then you back the pivot out. And hopefully, what it does is it sort of realigns things to allow the blade to come back center with the action pretty good. If I loosen up this action anymore, that blade continues to travel even closer to this side of the scale. And you can see there, we are not quite touching yet, but we're so close. It is so close, right? So I can't back that out anymore and get the action any smoother without getting the blade to rub. That really kind of bothered me. Now I can get the blade centered, but I have to crank that pivot down tighter, which makes the action really crappy. I like the execution on this. The price of this knife is $185. There's a good chance that mine, the one that they sent me, was just a little bit goofy and it just doesn't want to center up. Maybe you buy this knife and maybe your blade is centered. In which case I would say, you know what, it's worth it. 185 bucks, and I would have preferred the titanium liners. This is made in Italy. It looks good, right? The D10 is at least tuned well enough to flip it with the thumb studs, and I don't know why that's this goofy little potato-shaped knife. I just think it's kind of cool. I like the look of it, and it's definitely functional. It's not the thinnest behind the edge, right? It's not going to be necessarily the most convenient EDC knife in the whole world, but if it were centered, it would have made it a lot easier to say go ahead. CRKT sent me this thing directly, and it was off-centered out of the box, and I could not correct it, which really bothers me. So, I mean, you know, I don't know. It could be that all of them are going to be off-centered, or the majority of them are off-centered, or half of them are off-centered, or maybe just a quarter of them are off-centered, right? Maybe less than that. Maybe 1% of them are off-centered, and I got one, right? But I don't know, because this is the only one I'm handling, and it came directly from CRKT. So, price isn't bad. Wish it was titanium. Wish it was centered. I'm kind of This is one of those like buy it at your own risk kind of knives, right? Everything on paper looks good. The detent's just, you know, if I could get the action smoothed up a bit, that's the other thing. Even if it is centered, the action would need to be smooth enough, and maybe with a couple of drops of 10-weight nano oil it'd need to be smooth enough to make that flipper worth using. Otherwise, it's just in the way, you know? So, I don't know. I can't really give this thing a positive review. It's just got a couple of things that bother me. But it's not a bad knife either, right? I really wanted CRKT to knock this one out of the park because it just, you know, the combination of things, Lucas Burnley and the Squid, and you're upgrading it to M390, I want it to be good, right? It's just kind of came out, bleh, right? Not a good, it's not a positive review, it's also not a negative review. I know you're thinking, well, what am I supposed to gain from it? Take the parts of this review that you care about, right? Make your decision based on those, and then anything else that I said that you don't care about, then you can wave that off. But that's kind of where I stand on this. It's kind of, this is a rare ending to a review. I'm not really, it's almost kind of inconclusive. I don't know what to think about this. It's okay. That's... It's, if I had to give it a grade, I'd give it exactly a C, right? Which is a passing grade, but it's just not spectacular. That's going to be pretty much it today. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.